Some news popped up recently that Greta Gerwig, I think I'm saying her name right, is going to direct at least two of Netflix's adaptations of the Chronicles of Narnia. So Netflix is making movies based on C.S. Lewis's fantasy series. Apparently, maybe not just movies, maybe also TV shows. I don't know. It's all kind of in the ether at the moment. But this made me think more so. The news, I don't really care one way or the other. Greta Gerwig, great. She's a fine director. Barbie looks fun. But more so that a reminder. This is a reminder for me that Netflix is making Narnia movies, and it's sort of terrifying. I have not read the Narnia books in a long time, but they are some of my favorite childhood books. One of my sort of formative fantasy series as a young person, along with The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Prydain, which I believe Netflix is also turning into a series, the Terran Wanderer books, the Book of Three, The Black Cauldron, the High King, all those books by Lloyd Alexander, which remain some of my very favorite books of all time. I think probably I actually am more emotionally connected with Alexander's books than with Lewis's. I don't know. I just love those characters. But along with Tolkien and all of these, the Narnia books are some of my favorite and dearest books as a young person, and everything from The Magician's Nephew to The Last Battle and everything in between. So I do not consider myself Christian. I was raised Christian. I do not consider myself Christian anymore, although I do have a soft spot for Jesus, I guess, because I think he's a pretty cool dude who has a lot of good ideas about how you treat other people. But I do respect the fact that Narnia is a Christian text, and I think even more so than Tolkien's writing, even though both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were deeply religious men, Tolkien being Catholic and Lewis being Anglican, I think that Lewis was more interested in writing religious text. I mean, he was a Christian apologist. He wrote a lot of things, from The Great Divorce and the Screwtape Letters, a whole bunch of really, really well-written and reasoned Christian writing. And Narnia, of course, is a Christian story. Aslan, the lion, is a Christ-like figure and, is Christ, essentially, allegorically. And of course, unlike Tolkien, Lewis wrote a lot of allegory. Christianity is fundamental to the Narnia series. It's deeply rooted in Christianity. The point of the books is, in many ways, to tell a Christian fantasy story, deeply imbued with Christian belief and mythology and all the rest. And now Netflix has its grimy claws deep in this, and they are producing new Narnia movies. This is unsettling, both because I don't know how they will reconcile. I mean, Christianity is not in vogue right now. It is not fashionable. Much like Narnia was not fashionable for Susan by the end of the books, Christianity is not fashionable in the world of streaming and fantasy and entertainment and popular culture. But you really cannot make these stories without making them Christian. It's just not possible, and frankly, it shouldn't be done. It would be like taking some, and I'm not going to pick one, but like, let's say there was a Islamic or Buddhist or Hindi text, fantasy series or something that some deeply religious author wrote, and filled with allegory and religious meaning and all this, dedicated to one of those religions, and then it was taken and just completely brutally dissected and ripped apart and made into a secular, non-religious story. I mean, I think a lot of people would say, well, that's it's not cultural appropriation, but it's sort of a cultural I don't even know what the word is, but annihilation. To take Lewis's stories and rip the Christianity out of them it's taking the very soul out of those stories. As someone who doesn't identify as a Christian, I don't mind consuming Christian fantasy either. Like, I don't mind. It's actually great to have these religions that you can find these stories and take what you want from them. And there's a lot of good lessons in there, a lot of great characters, a lot of great morality lessons and whatnot. So I think that from my perspective, they should be adapted to the screen with these Christian themes intact, obviously. But I wonder how that actually will play out in Netflix. And Netflix, along with so many other of these big entertainment companies nowadays, Christianity is no longer the religion. There's a new religion, and it's this. Some people call it wokeism. Some people call it. I like to refer to it as like corporate diversity or whatever. Diversity 2.0. The drinker calls it the message. I like that too, the message. And the message, that's the religion. So how do you reconcile the message with Christianity? I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that like Christianity under Christ was actually extremely progressive for its time, teaching, to love your neighbors, love each other, love yourself, love your God. All it was very, very much about love, and it was, I sort of think of it as almost like a social leveling, right, at the time. Where it didn't matter if you were rich or powerful, like, the meek shall inherit the earth, all that stuff. But how do you reconcile sort of the social justice politics of the moment of the day with a story like Narnia and the themes that C.S. Lewis brought to Narnia? And I think that's really where I get nervous because, on the one hand, Narnia is a perfect hodgepodge of mythology and whatnot that you can do. I think you could have a very diverse Narnia, right? I think diversity isn't really the problem here. Unlike Tolkien's work, which is really rooted in geography and in genealogy and people of very specific places. I think that Narnia, it just has so many different. Tolkien was actually critical of Lewis's work because he thought it was just so grab bag from different mythologies and different stories, and there wasn't really that consistent, world building like he has in his books. So Lewis kind of just takes things like he's got fauns and centaurs and witches and people that come from the real world and people that are from these other lands and dwarves and there is certainly not the same kind of world building that you'll find in epic fantasy like Tolkien or Martin or any of these other authors out there. So I think you could really, it could be fine to have like racial diversity and a lot of that wouldn't upset the balance or the authenticity of the story. But then then you start to wonder, well, how far can you take that, and how far will they take that, and will they adapt these characters honestly? Are they going to portray the children like Lucy and Edmund and all these characters, with genuinely adapting who they are in the books to the screen? Because these are great characters and they don't need to be changed. Some of them go through amazing, enormous amounts of personal growth. There are things I think, especially like toward, that are a little dated in the last battle and whatnot. I think that you can adapt some things for modern audiences, and I know that's sort of like a terrifying like red flag of a phrase, but I think you can bring some of the stuff in these stories up to date a little bit because it was written in a different time with different social norms and whatnot. But I think that the trick is that how do you take these stories and authentically adapt them to without losing what made them special, without going overboard on all the sort of little social justice-y things that we see, in stuff today. And then, anyone who adapts this is between a rock and a hard place because you're going to have on one side people saying, oh, this is conservative. This is a conservative story, and there's not enough LGBTQ. There's not da 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 da. And on the other side, you're going to have people saying, like, we're going to riot if you don't adapt these faithfully. And I think you have to hew towards faithful. I think that's even though even though the not all the ideas and all the themes and everything are going to be perfect for modern sensibilities or whatever, I think you do have to hew towards faithful adaptations, because these are great stories. You've got Prince Caspian, you've got and you've got the horse and his boy. You've got the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't know why I couldn't think. That's the most famous one. Why couldn't I think of that? I don't know. It's been a while. All of these are great stories with great characters. But I guess I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, other than to say that it makes me very nervous. The whole thing makes me very nervous. It's sort of like whenever you hear about anything that's being adapted, how are they going to do this? I guess they're actually making a movie of one of Joe Abercrombie's books, and Best Served Cold, I believe, is the one. And that's exciting, but at the same time, I really always worry. I mean, how are they going to ruin this thing that I love? And it seems more and more that whoever the people behind adaptations care less and less about adapting it in a way that's faithful, and more about checking off these boxes and appealing to as wide of an audience as possible. And ironically, I really do think that when you try to appeal to a very, very broad audience and you try to represent everyone you can, you lose something like fundamental to the text in the adaptation, and then it starts to appeal to nobody instead. So you actually shrink the audience. I think if Game of Thrones had been adapted to like fit the message rather than to portray on screen what George R. R. Martin wrote, then I think it would never have been as popular as it became. I think that any time you take something and you think you can do better, rather than you have to make changes, and I'm just going to put that out there. You have to make changes when you adapt a text to the screen. It just never translates perfectly, but those changes should be in service to the story. Like, I can't portray this thing that's written in the book on the screen exactly, so I'm going to change it in a way that still gets that across, that still allows me to show what maybe in a book is internal thought. Like a lot of times in books, you'll have a narrative. It's all in somebody's head. So you have to convey that differently on screen, because you don't want to just like have a character narrating what's going on in their head, right? You have to show it. Sometimes you have to show what in a book might be told or whatever, obviously. But you still have to pursue that faithful adaptation. And I think that there's a reason that and this is what just drives me crazy about it. There's a reason this thing is popular in the first place, right? It's popular because people liked it. It resonated with people. And, and I think it's very condescending to say, well, sure, yeah, I know, but it's very white. We need to make it resonate with black people. It's too white. Well, maybe it already does resonate with black people. I don't know. I'm not black, obviously, but I'm pretty sure that black people can enjoy things with white people in them, just like white people can enjoy things with black people in them. I don't think we always have to change things or like make everything represent everybody all the time. Just common sense would suggest that that's not true. Common sense suggests that black people enjoyed The Lord of the Rings before there were black characters in it. And that it's also just fine to have fantasy that has black characters in it. Again, I bring up the D&D movie, which I just loved, and it has a multiracial cast, and it's wonderful and it's great, and it works really well for that story. And I honestly do think you can make Narnia pretty diverse and still be true to the story. But the real question there is not really so much one of racial diversity, but of like, how are they going to approach social issues? How are they going to approach Christianity? Yada yada yada. It's a unique challenge for Narnia, I think. And then of course I don't know how many people have read Lloyd Alexander's Prydain Chronicles. Those are based on Welsh mythology. There are some very very strong similarities to Tolkien's work, simply because they're both drawing on similar mythology and whatnot. But I love, they're more young adult oriented than The Lord of the Rings, but the wonderful characters with Taran or Taran, the assistant pig keeper, and Eilonwy and Fluter Flam the Bard, and Prince Gwydion, and just wonderful, wonderful stories. Not rooted in Christianity, but certainly rooted in Welsh mythology. And again, I think here's a world where authentically adapting it requires you to authentically portray kind of what a fantasy Welsh realm might look like. But my theory, my worry is that they're just going to adapt it to look like any other generic, boring fantasy world. And all of the fantasy worlds coming to the screen these days have become more and more and more generic. And that's unfortunate, because there's always room to write new fantasy, to create new things, to bring new worlds to the screen. You don't always have to just adapt things and change them to no longer have what makes them unique, including that sense of place, which is so fundamental to both historical fiction and fantasy. And it's also a shame, because, of course, you can make sci-fi and make it as diverse as you want. No one will even complain, because it makes sense in a sci-fi context, usually. Anyways, I know I've talked a lot about diversity and stuff lately, and it's one of those subjects that I kind of feel sad that I have to even talk about, because really there's so much room to have more diverse storytelling and a better approach to diversity, and instead we get sort of locked down in this fight that always does bring out both the worst in both sides, that brings out the racist, that brings out all that shit. So anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, tip your bartender. Peace.